Hey guys, it's Mr. Smine, and we're going to continue talking about experiment 1.4 at the Sand and Air Lab today. In this video, we're going to talk about how to take the data that you collected in the experiment and to figure out the answer to your purpose of the experiment. So as a reminder, the purpose of the experiment is to determine the percentage of air in a sample of sand. In your experiment, you should already have data. You should have already measured the volume of the sand with the air, the volume of the water, and the volume of the water and sand together. These graphics or these images will hopefully help us realize what we measured and what we need to do with those data points that we collected to get the answer that we want, the percentage of air. So the first thing that you measured was the sand, and that had air in it. So realize that that first measurement that you have, where you measured the amount of sand that you had, that wasn't just sand, that was sand with air spaces in between. So you can see the green dots represent the sand in this case, and there's white space between those green dots where air would be. The second measurement that you have is just a graduated cylinder full of water. The third measurement comes from when you add the sand into the water. So you should have been able to notice, you should have been able to observe that the amount of water that you had went up. And that's because the sand takes some space up in that water, so it causes the level of the water to actually rise. This last measurement, sand and water, has no air space in it. The water's taken the space of all the air that existed in your initial sand and air measurement. With these three data points, sand and air, water, and sand and water, we should be able to calculate the percentage of air that made up our original sample of sand. When I look at the data for this, I always like to start by looking backwards to figure out where I'm going, and then I could figure out how to get there once I know where I'm going. So to start out, my final answer is going to be the percentage of air. I know that I can find a percentage by taking the total volume of sand and air and dividing the volume of air by that total volume and multiplying it by 100. So we can make the analogy to figuring out a test or a quiz grade for this percentage. So when you have a test grade, what you're figuring out is the percentage that you got right, just like we're figuring out the percentage of air in this case. To figure out the percentage that you got right, you would take the total number of points on that quiz, and you would divide the number that you got right, the number of points that you earned, divided by that total number of points, and multiply it by 100. And that would give you the percentage. To find the volume of air, we can take the volume of sand and air, which would be this graduated cylinder, and subtract that from the volume of just sand. So again, you may realize that you don't have a volume of just sand. So this is something that we're going to need to be able to calculate from the data that we have. Remember that the volume of sand is the amount of space that the sand takes up. To calculate the volume of sand, or the amount of space that the sand takes up, we can take the volume of sand and water, which is represented by this graduated cylinder, and subtract the amount of water, which is this graduated cylinder. So we're taking the difference between the graduated cylinder with the sand in it and the graduated cylinder without the sand in it. So really what we're measuring is how much this graduated cylinder went up when we added sand to it. How much space did the sand take up in this water? And that's the same thing as volume of sand. So now we could take that work that we did, working backwards, and make it so that we're working forwards with the data that we have. So I'm going to take the volume of sand and water that I have and subtract the volume of water. And that's going to give me just the volume of sand. Then I'm going to take the volume of the sand, subtract the volume of the sand and air, and that's going to give me the volume of air. Then I'm going to find the percentage of air. I'm going to take the volume of air from here, divide it by my total volume of sand and air that I measured initially, and multiply that value by 100, and that'll give me the percentage of air.